of a demon being possessing me. It's about a girl, Linda Blair, who gets possessed by the devil, and about all these attempts to exorcise. And it's called The Exorcist because this priest, played by Max von Sydow, and I forget the other guy played, come in and try and, release the devil from this poor little girl. Ellen Burstyn plays the mother, way before your time. Anyways, there's a rumor that they're planning a sequel to The Exorcist, but this time it's about getting the priest out of the little boy. How are you, Ed? What's going on with NVIDIA? Look at Ed. Ed loves that joke. It's that Princeton pedo humor.
The fact that every joke has to be punctuated with a groan is another piece of this podcast I'll never quite wrap my head around.
That's right. Guess who I'm having dinner with tonight? I'm totally name dropping. I probably shouldn't say that in the same sentence as a pedo joke. I'm having dinner with the chancellor of UCLA.
To discuss your vocational programming?
Well, Ed, I'm glad you asked. No, I don't know. I think it's to discuss how I can give more money.
Probably that, yeah.
The reward of giving money to a university is you get called and they want your insight into academia, and they pretend to care for about 10 minutes, and then comes this opportunity. It was presented as an opportunity and to match some other gift or do something. But yeah, I have something called, let's talk about the accelerator program. So I'm a big fan. Public school trade changed my life. This isn't philanthropy. This is an overdue payback. And I give money to public universities. And I always say, find me the program no one else will give money to. So I don't want sexy shit. I don't want an engineering school or a school of international relations or a gym or none of that bullshit. So at UW-Madison, I'm the second donor to a wonderful program where the professors go to local penitentiaries. And if you're near your release or like less than 5 years from your release, you can take courses to work towards a BA.
That's cool.
And at UCLA, I'm doing adult education. Adult education, it's like vocational programming. No one wants to fund it. And I love it because it's very low cost, no admissions policy. And I'm doing, we should call this section of the program, Scott Virtue Signaling. I did
Prof G Philanthropy.
University of Georgia, I'm doing tenant rights. At Berkeley, I did scholarships for children of immigrants, as I am one of them.
The big question is, do you get your name on any of these things?
No, they've asked. They wanted to name one of the programs, and I don't want to have my name on anything.
Because you don't want anyone to know that you're doing this.
Well, yeah, I'm so shy. You know me, I'm very subtle. I don't like to talk about this sort of thing. No, I'm being very honest now. They wanted to call this the Galway program, and I'm like, no, because eventually they're going to decide that my jokes or something I did was totally inappropriate, and my kids are going to have to fight to keep my name on this thing as I'm 90 and reheating soup, and everyone decides I'm a name your favorite ist. If they can come up with reasons why they need to tear down Winston Churchill's statue in London, they can figure out a million things why they're going to need to take my name off a program. So I'm like, no, I don't.
It's going to be a giant compilation of every intro to Prof G Markets. That'll be your downfall.
Yeah, that's it. They'll be like, oh my God, I can't believe he said that. National. Anyway, so no, I don't have my name on. I'm not going to put my name on any of this shit.
Fair enough. Well, I'm glad that we talked about it and people know anyway. That's the most important thing, right?
There you go.
Tech companies are racing to secure data centers to handle the surge in AI computing demand. We've discussed this trend at length on the show, but more data centers means more demand for energy. In fact, S&P Global projects grid demand from data centers will rise 22% in 2025, and it will nearly triple by 2030. But the part that is talked about less is who's footing the bill. Right now, it looks like consumers might be paying. Bloomberg found electricity costs near major data center hubs are up as much as 267% compared to 5 years ago. So, Scott, everyone's very excited about data centers. Everyone's very excited about chips. We've seen a ton of announcements about these new data centers. OpenAI building trillions of dollars worth of data center capacity. They want to build 250 gigawatts of data center capacity. But the part that's getting, again, less attention is the energy side. Two big questions from me. One, how are we actually going to power these things? And two, if we can power them, what is it going to do to the cost of energy? Because as that Bloomberg article points out, in areas where data centers have been built, energy costs have more than tripled in just 5 years. And meanwhile, the plan is to build more data centers. So a lot to get into here. I will pause there and get your reactions.
The greatest arbitrage in history is the arbitrage of fossil fuels and in general energy. The more energy you produce, I mean, energy is like broadband. No matter how much of you have of it, people will find a use for it. Now, that's not to say the prices don't fluctuate, but the spike in this incremental demand and the kind of the price discovery happens at the frontier, right? So even though I think it's increased demand consumption by 6 or 7%, that's enough to take prices up 25, 50, or 100%. So what do we do about that? Do we end up doing what we do with a lot of places, and that is invest overseas? Should we be building the data centers in the Gulf? And the reason why that probably will happen, or that might happen, is that for the last 20 years, the dynamic in terms of capital flows have been that a bunch of institutional money managers fly to Riyadh, Dubai, or Doha, or Abu Dhabi and say, I run a biotech fund in the US. Please give me $100 million, $1 billion to invest it, and I will return back more capital. The shift is that now the Gulf investors they're still looking for alpha. They're still looking for good managers. But even more than that, they're looking for capital or to fund projects that create an infrastructure around manufacturing, services, education, the electronic arts. Take private was part of that, because they realize that while they have what feels like near infinite capital, the sea of oil beneath them at some point will run out. Now, I don't know if that's 20 or 30 years or 60 or 80, but they know they do have a fuse around trying to transition this economy. So when you go down there, they're open for business, but they want to invest in companies that will build some sort of local demand, local infrastructure, local, business operation. So I can see a situation where these companies make massive investments in a company like OpenAI in exchange for building those data centers with those processors in somewhere in the Gulf. What are your thoughts?
I'm just really struck by how everyone is so excited about these data centers, and we're just seeing this record investment into data centers. And meanwhile, people are not talking enough about energy and the fact that we need to power these things. And, people were talking about it maybe a year ago. I saw, op-eds and newspapers and people talking about it publicly on podcasts saying, this AI thing, it's going to be a lot of power demand, so we're going to need a lot more power. I know Bill Gates was talking a lot about that. But the reality is, right now, there is not nearly enough investment going into energy compared to the amount of investment that's going into data centers. And by the way, that is why all of these construction plans for these data centers keeps on getting delayed, because what happens is they announce these plans, these multi-billion-dollar deals. They say, we're going to build this thing. And then they realize that the waiting list to actually connect the data center to the source of power, the thing that's going to keep the lights on, is like 5, 6, 7 years long. And so it's essentially what we have here is a very simple and classic problem. The demand for energy, because of AI, is way outstripping the supply. And so then your mind goes to Econ 101. What does that mean? It means energy costs are only going to go way up. And I just want to sort of back up and highlight some of the numbers that we were mentioning there. So as I mentioned, OpenAI, they want to build out 250 gigawatts worth of compute over the next few years. I think by 2033, 2032. So let's just talk about how realistic that is. Last year, the entire US added about 56 gigawatts worth of energy capacity, and that was the most ever. OpenAI wants to build out a chip network that would consume 250. So that is going to be equivalent to a quarter of the entire US electric grid capacity. It would also mean that OpenAI alone would consume more than half of all of the energy capacity that we add over the next 8 years. If you wanted to supply 250 gigawatts of power, you would need to build 250 nuclear power plants. It would cost you $12.5 trillion. And I think what is striking is that we're all just assuming that this data center build out is a given. And yet there's this very practical logistical problem, which is how the fuck are you going to power these things? And, I think then the conversation goes to, okay, well, what do we do about it? Do we just say no to AI? I don't think anyone, or I'm sure some people want to do that. In fact, actually, a lot of Americans want to say that, but I don't think the market's going to let you do that. So you can say just like pull back on AI or build out the grid. And then it's a question of how do you actually build out the grid? And I think it's this energy question becomes more and more interesting because, the administration, there's been a lot of emphasis on how we need to drill, baby, drill. We need to get our energy back. All this focus on gas-fueled energy, fossil fuel energy. But I would also like to point out that even if you use gas-fueled energy, you're not even going to come close to the demand that these data centers are projecting. It's not even a question. Maybe you get it with nuclear, but again, as we've discussed, this takes decades and decades to build. So increasingly, I'm starting to believe that the route that you need to go is you need to go with solar energy. But of course, the administration is gutting all of the investments and the tax credits that fuel the solar industry. So I will pause again there. But I think the question is becoming clearly we need more energy in America if we're going to do this AI thing. And if we don't, the consequences are quite simple. AI is going to absolutely skyrocket your energy bill.
This all feels to me like it's desperate for some sort of technical breakthrough that reduces the energy demands. Because the whole notion of it's sort of this circular philosophical question, at what point do you not conduct an AI query for the best place to eat Indian food in London when the cost of that query inhibits you from being able to afford to go eat Indian food? Or that AI becomes something that is sequestered to wealthy people and corporations, and then we outsource the expense of AI to households that see their electric bills go up 20, 50, I've heard in some areas it's gone up 200%. Or at some point, does the government come in or weigh in and call it an infrastructure investment? Or do we come up with some sort of tiered pricing system where we charge, instead of having a bulk discount, if you're a B2B, if you're a business that's buying this capacity, at some point you're purchasing over a certain amount, which probably means you're an AI or an AI-related business, you pay a surcharge, which they then pass on to their consumers, which would hit their stock price. But at this point, you would argue if you need investment or deep pockets, you'd probably go after the pools of shareholder capital of these organizations are greater than the discretionary income of middle-class households in these areas. And then it gets very political because every congressperson wants to, so it's no accident that Musk announced a huge infrastructure project in Speaker Johnson's district, right? And so being able to cut the ribbon on a big data center or Colossus or whatever it is makes that politician look very good until the electric bills start coming for those consumers. So I wonder if there's going to be some sort of legislation that, either the government weighs in and provides subsidies for people. But if you think about, okay, we talk constantly about feeding and growing the middle class. And one way to do that is through, tax cuts. But a better way to do it, I would argue, because the reality is the middle class in America pay a lot of usage and consumption taxes, but distinct of the class warfare rhetoric, the middle class doesn't pay as a percentage of their income. They don't pay a ton of federal income tax. So I think about 70 or 80% of federal income tax is paid by the top 10% income earning households. But the best investment, I would argue, or a great way to support the middle class is through infrastructure investments, whether it's rail or power grid or clean water, highways that help you get to and from your house faster so you can spend more time with your kids, or tax credits for housing such that people can have more affordable housing. but it feels as if there needs to be a rethink around national energy policy. The problem is that there's such regulatory capture that it strikes me that if I had to predict what's going to happen here, is that there will be a huge investment in the grid, the majority of which will be absorbed by AI. So effectively, all that is a transfer from all homes and all taxpayers to the shareholders of AI.
Yes, I think this is such an important, the amount that energy costs are going up is so important because it's highlighting how this stuff is actually expensive. Like it actually costs something and someone has to pay for it. And up to this point, it has seemed to most people that it's just these like, Qatari billionaires or these Silicon Valley billionaires who are just funding these things. And there's this abundance mindset. And it's like, oh, $1 trillion here, $1 trillion there. We're just going to keep investing. But this is sort of highlighting, actually, we're not in a place of abundance, really, or at least not in a place of abundance in the way that Sam Altman seems to think. We actually have a scarcity of energy to the point that the costs are going to be felt by regular Americans. And what has been so interesting recently is the local community pushback that has been growing against data center build-outs. And this is very recent, but in the past few months, basically, $63 billion worth of data centers have been blocked because local communities have gotten together and they've said, no, you're not going to build this data center in our neighborhood. It's happened in Ohio, in Texas, in Indiana. Google just withdrew one of their data center applications because they got all of this pushback. And the argument from the people saying no is basically, this actually doesn't help us. It doesn't help our communities because it sends energy prices through the roof. And then the other point, which I think is also really important that they've made, is that it actually doesn't even create jobs, really. Because one thing about data centers, it's not like a Walmart. The data center is basically a giant robot. And you build the thing, and there are construction jobs when you're building it. But then once it's built, you basically just let it sit there. And it's only a few people who are servicing the thing. You look at the data center that Apple built in North Carolina, as an example. They spent $1 billion on this data center. It created less than 100 permanent jobs. So that's equivalent to like a Series B startup, like showing up in North Carolina. So huge costs on energy and temporary job creation through the construction. But once it is built, actually the local community doesn't really benefit from it. And as you say, it's a robot that's building shareholder value for the people who own AI stocks. And so it's becoming a really interesting, and I think this is going to become more prominent in the political sphere, but it's this NIMBY versus YIMBY debate where people are saying, not in my backyard, and you're YIMBY when it comes to housing. I'm YIMBY when it comes to housing. But I got to say, I'm starting to find this data center argument against the data center builder. I'm starting to find it somewhat compelling, especially if it's going to triple people's energy bills.
I mean, right now in Virginia, I guess about a quarter of the energy is already going to data centers. And these things sort of typify people's fears around where the world is going, and that is these economic centers powering stocks don't require anybody. You don't even need to turn on the lights during the day because there's nobody working there. So this is going to be. It is very difficult to spin up new energy sources, right? It takes 10 years to build a nuclear power plant. Cost overruns are just not easy. So electricity companies or power generation companies have been some of the best performing stocks. Some of them have even outperformed AI stocks. Constellation, the largest nuclear power operator in the U.S., is up 78% this year, more than any of the Magnificent Seven. Brookfield Renewables, one of the largest public renewable energy companies, is up 47%, also outpacing the Mag 7. American Electric Power, up 30%. Entergy, another utility that focuses on the southern U.S., is up 20% year to date. Because what you want as a business is you want moats, and then you want liquid, you want friction in supply, you want a lack of friction in demand. So what do we have? We have demand that is just like accelerating with very little friction, right? But at the same time, there's a lot of friction around bringing on supply. So if you own the supply, it's champagne and cocaine. And the example I would use is that as someone who travels a shit ton and stays in nice places, you can't spin up a five-star hotel. The top 1% are garnering so much money, and there's a YOLO attitude, live for today. They're traveling more. There's a lot of pent-up demand to travel. So the demand at five-star resorts has vastly outstripped. Five-star resorts are like nuclear power plants. To find a place, you can build a five-star hotel, get the permits, the local residents, plan the thing, raise the capital, and build a world-class hotel. It takes you 10 years. So in between that lag, as consumption or demand goes up, you have seen hotel prices at nice hotels basically double since pre-COVID. I think that's a kind of a relatively, a reasonable analogy for what's about to happen to power consumption. And that is, there is no kind of easy spin it up, large scale, multi-gigawatt power supply available. And it all feels to me, again, like wherever we head, based on the regulatory capture, based on who the president is dining with, that Doug Burgum is going to figure out a way to come up with some sort of big, beautiful bill that taxes every American in the form of taxes and transfers wealth with subsidized energy to these AI companies the same way we're subsidizing all sorts of other things for, different politically connected sectors.
I think that the energy build out is the most important thing. And just when we talk about like, what do we do about it? Just some data I would point you to. Again, there's been this emphasis on we need gas to fuel this energy. The most amount of gas-fired energy that has been deployed in a year, the most has been 12.5 gigawatts. OpenAI wants 250 gigawatts. So you're not going to do it with gas. As you point out, maybe you get it with nuclear, but it takes decades to build that out. And as one of our research analysts on the team, Chris O'Donoghue, said, the problem isn't that we need energy supply, it's that we need energy supply now. That's exactly what AI companies are asking for. We need the energy to come online right now. So I think you got to do it with solar. Solar made up more than half of all of the new energy capacity that was added last year. But for whatever reason, probably for anti-woke reasons, the administration thinks that solar is hippy-dippy or woke. Trump has this hatred of solar, and so there is this attack on the solar build-out. And because you mentioned the Big Beautiful Bill, we're seeing less investment in solar. We're seeing elimination of tax credits. And as a result, it's going to reduce solar production capacity by about 20%. Those are the projections right now. So all of this comes down to, if we want to do AI, we need more focus on the energy side of things, and we need more attention on how do we actually build out the energy. And it's not just a question of drill, baby, drill. It's a question of everything. It's a question of wind. It's a question of solar. It's a question of nuclear. And it seems as if the conversation has moved away from that because people are so excited about the AI thing that they've gotten way out over their skis on this. And there needs to be more of a rational conversation of like, okay, sounds good, but let's keep the lights on. How do we actually power these things?
Problems like this, when they're this obvious and this big, oftentimes don't end up happening. And that is, the shit you're worried about is the shit that, generally speaking, doesn't happen. And I can see a scenario along the lines of the following. Sam Altman, in order to justify this valuation, is making these just kind of enormous, outlandish projections, including, this is how much power I will need, because I'm basically saying to the market, this is how much AI is going to permeate all corners of society. This is how big my company is going to be. I need 250 gigawatts, right? It's sort of like announcing to the world, we're going to hire 3 million employees based on our current growth. Buy my stock. This is how confident I am. So one, there's still a scenario where AI is an interesting technology, but it's not powering everything in our lives. We're not glued to it every day. It's not operating every car that picks us up and doing all our finances and in charge of all of our workflow. That it has some uses, but it's more niche, and it never really gets the traction that the current valuations justify. Two, that there's some sort of breakthrough where the energy consumption demands just dramatically diminish. I mean, to a certain extent, the Honda Civic came in, and it was a better car, but the reason it was a better car was because it cost you $12 a week to power the thing instead of 22, because it just had a more efficient engine and a smaller car wrapped around the engine that just had better mileage. So I think there's a lot of things here that could change the calculus. What's clear is we're going to need more energy. I also think that, like, I'm a drill baby drill person, but I also think we should have kept some of those subsidies for renewables. Economics ultimately went out. The number one producer of wind is Texas, and renewables are still right now probably the most cost-efficient incremental capacity to bring on. Specifically, I believe wind and solar are the least expensive and quickest power generation to deploy, even without government subsidies. I would also argue there's a really strong geopolitical reason to keep energy prices low. I believe that if I think the war in Ukraine, in how long it goes, is a function of oil prices. And that is, if the price goes below $50 a barrel, I think it's in the low 60s right now, I think Putin has to come to the table, because 50% of his economy is based on the price of that. And at some point, the cost of production is greater than that number, I think, if it gets to like 40 or 45. So I think we have a lot of reasons to massively invest in energy production across, all the different dimensions. So is it the old dirty stuff? I would argue that stuff is not going away as quickly as it should, but it's also cost ineffective. Is it solar? Is it wind? Is it, LNG? I think it's like door number 4, all of it, right? And we're the largest energy producer in the world. We're the largest oil producer. I mean, people just don't realize how strong we are economically. Oil independent, food independent, and we're the number one producer of oil in the world. And China is making, and you pointed this out last week, to their credit, they're going to add, I believe, more solar power generation in this year, at least that's a stat you had a couple of days ago, which blew my mind, than we have in total currently in the United States.
But solar is woke. I mean, China understands the issues.
I don't know how these things got so politicized. By the way, on a ground level, I'm building a home, and one of the things we're trying to figure out is how to buy the solar panels now to qualify for the tax credits. And all of these solar panels, my understanding, come in from China. Like, China's made just a huge bet on renewables. But my gut tells me that it's so obvious that there's just going to be such a demand for energy consumption. And then Sam Altman is out there saying, I'm going to need the energy of the EU to power my unbelievable business. I don't know. It's all making me very skeptical that we're going to need as much energy as Sam Altman is saying, or as much incremental energy.
Whatever the solution is, whether it's less AI or more efficient AI or more energy or more efficient energy or cost-effective energy, the point is something has to give, because you look at the numbers, as you often say, the math ain't mathin'.
Just to wrap it up, at some point, middle-class households are gonna say, look, I'm not willing to not eat and not be able to buy groceries because my electricity bill is so high, such that Scott and Ed can edit the notes for their newsletter using Anthropic.
Or as we're about to discuss, so that my son can jerk off to AI porn on ChatGPT.
That's a good segue. Well done. Very elegant. There is a reason you're not on CNBC.
So, it sounds like progress until you kind of remember that they've had many child safety announcements that have happened over the past few years. And the research has shown that basically none of these features really work. They're really weak at protecting against self-harm content, bullying content, sexual content, etc. So, whatever efforts they have been making, they're not really good enough. And it's starting to appear to me as if they're more interested in announcing these safety features than they are in actually implementing them. We'll see with this PG-13 rating, but track record isn't great. And then with Sam Altman, he announced that ChatGPT was, quote, originally pretty restrictive to be careful with mental health issues, but he says that they are now going to, quote, relax the restrictions in most cases. So some varying responses to the mental health thing. But what is clear is that these companies have to say something about it. And they are saying things. I think the question is, are they going to really do anything about it?
If I didn't know better, I would think there's a possibility here that these firms are more concerned with shareholder value than the well-being of our children. It's just, I'm starting to get that sense or that feeling. So just as an example, we downloaded an app called Q Studio, I think, or Q Studio. And essentially it's an app, and I can control my 15-year-old's phone, and I can control what apps he's allowed to use. It alerts me to sensitive content he might be searching for. And I had sort of a philosophical argument with myself around, should I really be the East German Stasi following my son? But I am comfortable being able to turn off his phone and say, okay, it's study time, or you need to wind down, or beyond a certain time at night, all your apps are shut off. And this is a nice little app. I imagine I don't know if it's 3 engineers, 10 engineers, 20 engineers, but every company could do a much better job of this app, and they choose not to. So the fact that Meta, Alphabet, and Apple don't have this app readily available, or this feature, means they don't want to make it easy for you. So they do these parental controls, which are mostly hand-waving. I've tried using the parental controls on Meta, and granted, I'm in tech, but I'm not good at this stuff, but I just give up. I find it confusing. And they will create the illusion of complexity here. It's very straightforward. There should be no social media for kids under the age of 16. We just need to age gate it. There should be no smartphones in schools. And I'm increasingly believing you cannot have synthetic relationships available to anyone under the age of 18. Because the collision, I don't know if you saw this, but Sam Altman has announced that we don't want to be in the business of being in moral judgment. I think some such bullshit. We're going to allow erotica. I love that name. It's porn, all right? It's not... This isn't nibbling on someone's ears and poetry. And this is all right. I like bukkake and Asian casting porn. I mean, it's porn, all right? By the way, those aren't my preferences, Ed, just so you know. My shit gets much darker than that. Anyways, 25% of search queries on Google are related to porn. This is an enormous business. And one of the reasons this is a difficult sector to have peer-reviewed research on is there is very little academic research on it, because no one wants to be known as the porn professor. So what do we know? We know that teens are spending about 5 hours a day on social media, or about a third of their waking hours outside of school. According to the CDC, adolescent depression is up 60% since the introduction of mobile or social going on mobile. And then from internal meta-research, this is research they did, 1 in 3 teenage girls who experienced body image issues reported that Instagram made them feel worse. And so you have this collision of very unfortunate things. And that is, having kids on social media and on these platforms is a really profitable business. Platforms earned $11 billion from kids under the age of 18 in 2022, on pace for $13 billion in 2025. Instagram's $4 billion from teens. YouTube gets about $1 billion, get this, $1 billion in revenues from viewership from kids that are under the age of 12. TikTok gets $2 billion from teens. And ad spending targeting minors rose 24% year on year in 2025, reaching $8 billion in 2025, up from $6.6 billion. So what do you have? We know that the more time we get kids on phones, the more depressed they are, and the more money these guys make, right? So we have linked shareholder value to teen depression. That is not good. And then where it's going to get really fucking scary is you have a cohort of young men and teen boys who get mixed messages around what it means to approach a woman, and are told, and I think some of this information is good, I think some of it is not good, that there's no young man in high school or anywhere else, or say in college, wants to be that guy, that it makes an unwelcome advance on a woman, no matter how respectful, and then gets a reputation as that guy, as the creep, right? Or is not confident, or not in shape, or whatever it is, or hasn't taken risks, has not developed resilience, is used to frictionless online dating where you just swipe right and maybe get a date, usually not. And the result is, okay, if I'm a 14-year-old male, and I am not comfortable around women, and I just haven't learned those skills yet, which describes most 14 and 15-year-old. That would be a fairly apt description for most adolescent males. And then I can go home, and I'm getting these synthetic, visually near perfect images of a girl that learns everything about me and says the right things and will perform erotic, i.e., pornographic acts for me. And you're going to have essentially, why wouldn't? How can these kids? These kids can't compete. There's no way they can compete against these things. And then the thing that I find so upsetting about this is we've been talking a lot about synthetic or character AI relationships, is that, and I've been writing about this, sexual desire from young men is not a bug, it's a feature. And that is, I think of it as like fire. And that is, fire can be bad. You can start objectifying women. You can believe that you can have unreasonable expectations around what a relationship is. You can think of women in a negative light from this shit. That's when fire burns a forest down. For the most part, sexual desire from young men is fire that, if it's captured in an engine, can fuel cylinders and move progress forward. How does it move progress forward? You're a young man, you would really like to have a girlfriend at some point to be physical with, romantic with, and have sex with. So you start working out. You have a plan. You practice kindness. You show resilience. You show a willingness to endure rejection. You learn how to be funny. You learn how to open. You learn how to approach. You learn how to maintain a rep. You learn how to have a plan and how to articulate your plan to people. And you basically learn all the features of what it is to be human and successful in that environment and in other environments. And I wonder how many of these kids are going to take these risks and feel the need to take these risks when they have the most ridiculously lifelike, easy, frictionless sexual experiences available on their phone and their computer at home. And we connect it, that attention, we connect it to massive shareholder value. And just sort of bring it home or personalize it, I barely graduated from UCLA. Barely. Graduated at 2.27 GPA. And one of the reasons I graduated was I loved going to class. Specifically, I loved going to campus. Why did I love going to campus? All my fraternity brothers were there. UCLA was a ton of fun. There were people playing football and frisbee in the quad. And it was something out of a fucking Cinemax film. There were so many hot women everywhere. And there was a non-zero, granted near zero, but a non-zero probability that I would be able to meet an attractive woman, say, hey, we're having a party back at the fraternity, come by. And lightning might strike. And, at some point later, I might have the opportunity to be physical with this person. That was really motivating for me. My first girlfriend was in college for a serious relationship. If I'd had near lifelike, tested 1 million times a minute to tickle my sensors, my mental triggers around what sexual predilections I had, I just don't think I would have gone on campus as much. And I don't think young men are going to go on campus as much. I don't think they're going to leave their house as much. I don't think they're going to want to go have drinks with friends. I don't think they're going to want to go to football practice. I don't think they're going to volunteer at nonprofits or go to church. So I see this as, again, another attempt. We have connected to shareholder value, things that make us less mammalia, that make us less, that quite frankly, attack our manhood, attack our risk aggressiveness, attack what it means to experience real victory. Because the thing I hate about these fucking synthetic relationships is they give people the sense that relationships are supposed to be easy. They're not. The most wonderful things, you'll see this, the most wonderful thing in your life will be forming a romantic partnership with someone, figuring out how to develop economic security such that you can have kids, and then raising those children. And the only thing I can guarantee you about all that shit is it's really fucking hard. And if you don't develop the skills to navigate a partnership, navigate romantic interests, navigate raising kids, navigate the corporate environment, because you become used to synthetic relationships that are just so fucking vanilla and easy and always tell you you're great and laugh at every joke you make, you're never going to develop those skills. And you're going to wake up. I think we're going to just raise a generation of young people who wake up and are like, I have no ability to deal with other people. I don't know what real victory feels like. And I'm anxious, obese, and depressed.
I don't think many people would disagree with anything that you just said. And the trouble is, there is so much money in this. There is so much money in children and advertising to children and entertaining children and keeping them glued to their devices. And there's also so much money in porn. Porn makes up 25% of global internet traffic. People spend $3,000 on porn every second. So this is an extremely profitable business, the business of porn. And it is therefore kind of a question. I mean, the markets are going to roll on and they are going to go full steam ahead on porn, and more specifically AI porn, because AI porn is a more cost-effective way of delivering porn to people. So it's a choice for these CEOs and for these AI leaders. And it's a choice for Sam Altman. And I want to point you to a quote that he said on a podcast. I believe this was a few months ago, maybe a year ago, where he addressed this choice.
There's a lot of short-term stuff we could do that would really juice growth or revenue or whatever and be very misaligned with that long-term goal. And I'm proud of the company and how little we get distracted by that, but sometimes we do get tempted.
Are there specific examples that come to mind? Any decisions that you've made?
Well, we haven't put a sex bot avatar in ChatGPT yet.
That does seem like it would get time spent.
Apparently it does.
And now they do.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that and I kind of have just one general feeling. Fuck you. You and your hushed tones and your faux concern. If we're waiting on the better angels of Sam Altman or Satya Nadella or Tim Cook or Mark Zuckerberg or Elon Musk to show up, don't hold your breath. Stop being such fucking idiots. There have to be laws. We live in a capitalist society where your power, your selection set of mates, your influence, how much people laugh at your jokes, your ability to take care of your children is all correlated to wealth. So what we know with 100% certainty or 99.9% certainty is the CEOs of these companies will make decisions. It will rationalize decisions incrementally, regardless of how many teens start cutting themselves or how it separates them from their parents and key relationships. So to a certain extent, it's not Sam Altman's fault, it's ours. It's pretty simple. Age-gate social media, no phones in schools, no synthetic relationships under the age of 18, no pornographic material for kids under the age of 18, removal of Section 230 protections for algorithmically elevated content, and start fucking fining these companies a percentage of their revenues, not a parking ticket. And here's an idea. Someone does a perp walk. But this notion that we keep hoping that these guys are going to get it and their better angels are going to show up, come on. Sam's doing what he's supposed to be doing. He is adding a crazy amount of shareholder value to justify the $500 billion valuation he just raised money at. He's got to figure out a way to create the GDP of Finland in the next 2 years. And if it means increasing attention by 10, 20, 30% among people under the age of 25 with lifelike porn, he's going to rationalize why they should do it. And he'll put in place some faux controls that kids can get around. Folks, this is up to us. And the notion of the illusion of complexity that gets weaponized here in these false or hollow arguments are just that. They're false misdirects. Do you realize how much trouble a bar gets in if they let in kids under the age of 21? They get in real trouble. You can lose your liquor license. So why would it be any different here? Because the reason is more different is because we have become so co-opted by money that if a company can add tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in shareholder value, well, child safety kind of takes a backseat. We're gonna nod our head, and Sam's gonna talk in hushed tones about, we don't do these things because we're more concerned with the Commonwealth than shareholders. No, Sam is going to continue to do whatever will increase shareholder value by $1 every day. That is his first, his second, and his third priority. And quite frankly, that's his job. It's our job to elect people who say, okay, our kids should not be engaging in these relationships. Our kids should not be consuming content that results in a 60% increase in self-harm. And we have to have elected leaders that aren't total whores and sort of nod. And by the way, this is on both sides of the aisle, hands down, and have thoughtful questions about privacy in these issues and want to hear more about it because they just got money from Meta or from Alphabet or for whatever PAC is the false front for these things or the veneer, and that we don't have a president who basically wants to hang out with these guys. So this is really, I'm always freaked out and I catastrophize because I'm angry and depressed, but I think there is a legitimate reason to worry about the collision of adult content and synthetic relationships and struggling young men. I think that is a fucking disaster waiting to happen. I think you're going to find, we talk about these, I think they're called NEETs, neither employed.
Yeah, employed, enrolled, or in training. Yeah.
Yeah, nothing, right? I think that could quadruple in the next 5 or 8 years. Because it's like, well, if my parents will let me live in the basement and I can find enough cheap calories to survive, why wouldn't I stay at home and have these interesting, exotic, erotic, pornographic, intellectually somewhat stimulating relationships with friends, mentors, and girlfriends on an algorithm and a screen? And by the time I emerge from my fucking cave, I'm going to have no skills at all. None whatsoever, right? It's almost like these, they call them sexpats. These guys who've just given up on their local society and they move to Thailand or some other place where they can basically have a relationship for a much lower cost, much lower effort, much more frictionless. Take that times 100, and it's going to be not involve any humans at all. But this is, and the thing that pisses me off so much about this is that we don't want to admit and acknowledge the solutions are a lot simpler than these guys would have you believe.
Just to go over some of the solutions that other countries have had, Norway, they just implemented a complete ban on social media for people under 13. The plan is to raise it to 15. And Australia just passed a law which is going to ban social media for children under 16. And that's going to be going into effect later this year. But I think the point being, like, as you always say, money wins and money will always win. And we can't keep expecting and hoping that people and tech leaders and business leaders are going to regulate themselves. They might talk about it for a time, but as we see here, no, they're never going to regulate themselves. It's the government's job to do the regulation. It's the government's job to figure out what the rules of the road are. They're supposed to be the referee. They figure out what the boundaries are. And so you need the government to set the rules here and say what is okay and what isn't okay, make it punishable by law, and then let capitalism do its thing. I mean, we talk about this a lot. We like the competition, but this expectation that these tech leaders are going to have sort of the moral bandwidth to regulate themselves and to do it in a thoughtful way, if 230% and 500% respectively in the past year. That is really why we're paying attention to these companies. The stocks are absolutely ripping right now, and the idea could be that they are going to compete with SpaceX, perhaps one day dethrone SpaceX. They're certainly a way off from that at the moment. But Scott, your reactions to the absolute explosions in the stocks of these two fledgling space companies?
I think it's really exciting because I think it'll get everyone's greed glands going and people will go into the space. And we said earlier in the year that the most powerful and possibly dangerous monopoly wasn't even, YouTube or Instagram in terms of social media. Amazon at 50% of e-commerce, Meta at 75% or 2/3 of all social media, and Alphabet with 90+% of search. The fact that Elon Musk or SpaceX is responsible, I think, for about 2/3 of all launches. I mean, the way to think of it is we're one of 9 unremarkable rocks with a little bit of moisture and gas and one of them appears to sustain life as far as we know. That's one of 100,000 galaxies and 1 million different universes. I mean, the potential of space is pretty striking, right? And one company appears to be or was developing a monopoly on, well, there's Earth and there's everything else. And it's like, well, okay, if you have a monopoly on everything else, there might be incredible upside there, but also you want a lot of competition here. So I think it's super exciting. Right now, of the 10,200 active satellites, 8,500 are Starlink. By the end of 2025, 6 million subscribers and 62% of global satellite broadband revenue is going to go to Starlink. And there are 3 pure-play public space companies with market caps larger than 10 billion. Rocket Lab was up, almost tripled last year, up 178%, and it's up 6-fold, 500% over the past year. EchoStar, a similar satellite communications company, up 231% this year. AST Space Mobile, a company building a Starlink-like satellite broadband network, is up 356% year to date, up over 2,500% in the last 2 years. Stock's up 26-fold in the last 2 years. They've only have 6 satellites in orbit, but they're aiming to get to 45 to 60. There's Blue Origin and Kuiper what would be just super interesting, and Mia did this research, it's just as we were excited about GLP-1, I always feel like we're late.
No.
You don't feel like we're late. So the question is, how do we go further downstream and find the suppliers? These guys are going to raise so much capital. They're not dumb. They realize that these stocks have gone crazy, so they're going to issue a ton of stock and they're going to start buying. What I want to know is, what are the O-rings, or the type of metal, or the type of plastics, milled products, specialty components that go into these things? And are any of them publicly traded, or could we buy any of them? Because the amount of CapEx that's about to go into space is only going to be, it's not going to rival what's going into AI, but it strikes me that this is going to be, just as we've been tracking AI and talking about the extraordinary amounts of money, I wonder if we'll be talking about space and launch capability with the same type of valuations and growth over the next couple of years that we've been talking about AI in the last 24 months.
Just to go over some of the numbers, like AST Space Mobile, as you say, up 2,500% in the past 2 years. This is unbelievable. You look at what they've done. They've got 6 satellites in orbit. They're planning to launch another 45 satellites into orbit by the end of next year. So they're getting there, building out the satellite network. But remember, you got to keep in mind, 8,500 satellites out there are Starlink. So, they're beginning to compete, but not really. Then there's Rocket Lab, which is Morgan Stanley calls them the alternative to SpaceX. They're not really building a network, but they are launching stuff into space, and they are becoming sort of the second alternative to SpaceX. If you want to launch payloads into space, you might go with Rocket Lab. They have this Rocket Lab Neutron rocket. That's their flagship rocket, which is sort of trying to compete with the Falcon Heavy. So that's another option. But something I have been thinking about, this stock performance is absolutely crazy. I mean, 2,500% in the past 2 years, Rocket Lab up 600%. Like, this is crazy town. And you look at the valuations. I mean, you got Space Mobile that is trading at 500 times expected sales for 2025. So these aren't fully rational valuations. And it does remind me of this dynamic that we've discussed about private versus public. And that is, there's only one space company that people are really excited about, and it's SpaceX. And you can't invest in it because it's a private company, unless you are an accredited investor, unless you know someone who can get you some shares. But when you look at the stock performance of these companies, it does feel as though those are just the names that are associated with space, and people who are investing in the public markets just want to get some sort of exposure to space. So I do think that these are the kinds of stocks that you want to be really wary of. Like, this kind of explosion is not really tied to the fundamentals. To me, it's more of a momentum thing where there's so much demand for space. And we all agree space is a big deal. It's going to be important. But the one company that you'd want to invest in, you can't invest in. So you go to these competitors, which, are making some progress, but let's be real, they don't hold a candle to SpaceX.
Mia pulled together some research with some of the component suppliers for satellites. Honeywell, they make antennas, high-speed radios, data transmitters, receivers that allow satellites to send and receive information. Their clients include Boeing, Airbus, Lockheed Martin, and SpaceX. It also holds a majority stake in quantum computing firm Quantum that recently raised about $600 million at a $10 billion valuation from investors, including NVIDIA. And their backlog grew 10% year on year. It's down 10% year to date, trades at 3 times sales, roughly in line with its 5-year historical average. So there's a company that appears to be in the space but hasn't had the same sort of updraft. Universal Microwave Technology, a Taiwanese firm that manufactures super high-frequency electronics that handle the radio waves satellites use, and their components are used in satellites themselves and also in the ground receivers. It's up 39%. But to your point, space is obviously a really risky business. Fewer than 1 in 4 venture-backed companies even make it to orbit with a vehicle. I had dinner with a friend of mine who works at a large PE firm, and he said the cheapest way to invest in SpaceX right now is through EchoStar, that I think EchoStar either owns has a stake in SpaceX, but he described it. He basically said that EchoStar is it's not cheap though. It's tripled in the last year. Is the cheapest way to own SpaceX.
That sort of describes the dynamic, right? It's like everyone wants to get to SpaceX, so they take these interesting diversions to get there.
I love this. I just love seeing competition, and the fact that these stocks. What happens is when these stocks go up 25-fold, you're just going to see a ton of venture activity in the space, ton of human capital go in, and people trying to figure out how to, get shit into space and attract capital. This might be, if any of these guys becomes somewhat formidable, gets in striking a SpaceX, that's what probably would motivate SpaceX to go public so they can run away with it on a capital basis. But I think it's super exciting. I think, and we were talking about this in the editorial call, I think we should start following space kind of the same way we have been following AI.
Okay, let's take a look at the week ahead. We will see the consumer price index for September, despite the government shutdown. We'll also see earnings from Netflix. We'll see earnings from Tesla, from P&G, Coca-Cola, and Intel. Any predictions, Scott?
Really interested in this Netflix deal. And I know you talked about this. We talked about it last night. But basically, Netflix is partnering with Spotify and has essentially said, okay, let's be honest, Disney Plus and Hulu, that's not our competition. Our competition is YouTube. And they've done a deal with Spotify for some of their original content. I think it's The Ringer, Bill Simmons, and some crime drama stuff. And we're going to run it on Netflix. And I think that what you're going to see in the next 12 months, I think you're going to see a lot of podcasts, or what started as podcasts, running not only in streaming media. I think the real home for them, or the more opportune home, is on cable networks. Why? If you think about cable networks, they're actually still, if you did know what amazing businesses they were 10 years ago, and you just looked at them today, they still look like good businesses. They're declining, but they still spin off a lot of cash flow. The problem with these businesses is not only on the revenue side, it's that the expenses haven't moved. The expenses haven't come down. They dramatically need to decrease the costs of these shows. And podcasts do that. I mean, essentially, 25% of our listens are on a TV streamed through YouTube. But I can guarantee you, we cost a lot less than your traditional.
The distinction is becoming increasingly blurry. I don't know if you agree with that.
Yeah,
but
it's true. It's true.
I mean, the private markets are functioning pretty much like the public markets. And, I just think it's a shame that this is happening, because I think it's a shame that we're not having more companies, more strong, growthy AI companies that have really proven themselves. They're not going public. And I'll just put it flat out. I want to invest in OpenAI. I want to invest in all the AI startups.
Or they are coming public, but once all of the money has already been made.
Exactly.
Coming public at a full valuation.
And that's a shame. And my issue is, I think a lot of people saw this headline. They said, well, this solves the problem. You can get in. It's like, no. I can get in some bullshit basket and pay 1 to 2% in fees per year, and then pay the 20% in the carry.
I was going to say, if there's a venture capital fund that's like actively courting people in their 20s and 30s that are not like centimillionaires, you probably don't really want to invest there. The best way to get in early on a hot venture-backed private company that then goes public is to work there and be paid in part with RSUs or ISOs, some sort of stock option. That's the best way. The second best way is to be like the college roommate of the guy that founds Uber. Like that's a really great way. And I'm saying this like half facetiously, but like at the end of the day, life is not fair. Don't you think everybody wishes that they had the ability to invest in Facebook in 2006? Like obviously everybody, it's not going to be democratized because the wealth of the world is not democratized. It sucks. Get mad about it. Start a band. Put on eyeliner. You know what I mean? Like, what do you want me to tell you? Like, it's not going to be fair. It's never going to be fair. So
it's become increasingly unfair, is what I would say. It's gotten a little out of control.
one thing that's true, Ed, and one reason that's true.
Yeah.
People talk about the small cap premium in the stock market, which has vanished. But there used to be this concept that small caps offered better performance than large caps over time. And there were all these reasons for it, like growing earnings off of a smaller base and the multiple increasing as companies become more well-known. Like there are a lot of that's vanished. And people don't understand why it vanished. The reason is the best young growth companies no longer come public as small caps.
Exactly.
They come public with $20 billion valuations. They go right into the S&P.
This is my point.
Right.
$500 billion valuations. OpenAI is 19th most valuable company in the world. It's a private company.
And 10 people benefited.
Exactly. And
I know,
my point
I
to
got
you,
it.
Josh, is
I got
that's
it.
new. That's new. And,
Yes.
and I do believe it is unfair. And fair point. You know, I'm complaining. Go start a band. Go work for OpenAI if you really want to. Maybe I fucking will. Maybe I'll be their podcaster. But my point is, we, the young people, the retail investors, can't get in. And I just want to say this because it happened while I was on break. There was a Business Insider article that came out about this at this point that I've been making. Specifically about how all the best companies are staying private and kind of the shitty companies, sans maybe Figma, are going public. And so we're frozen out.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that premise. I don't think
Okay.
it's all shitty companies going public, but
Okay.
okay, continue.
Okay. Less impressive companies. Maybe I'm being too harsh.
Well, remains to be seen who's impressive. You need a little bit more seasoning.
Okay.
You need a little bit more time for these companies to see which are the good and which are the bad.
We'll table this one, and then you and I will get into an argument about this later because we do need to get through this. I just want to cover this one point. Joe Weisenthal, podcaster, Bloomberg journalist.
Shout to Joe. That's my boy.
I like the guy. He came at me
All
on
right, good.
Twitter. He posted this article. He said, the way people talk about wanting to get access to hot private companies drives me crazy, riddled with hindsight bias and other biases. I just want to say, Joe,
Okay.
you got to at me next time. I mean, he screenshotted the article, Ed Elson. And there's people talking about this. It's me talking about it. So he's got to at me next time.
That's a vicious subtweet
It's vicious.
where he screen grabs your quotes in an article he doesn't like. That's like
Exactly.
that's a very
Vicious.
aggressive.
I don't know why he's coming at me.
You and Joe, if you guys spend time together, you guys actually would probably be friends. Joe is awesome.
I totally agree. But we're going to have to get over this beef.
I'm going to connect you guys behind the scenes after this. I'll do it. I got it.
Okay, thanks, Josh. Let's take a look at the week ahead. We'll see fresh inflation data from the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index for July. We'll also see consumer confidence for August. And NVIDIA is reporting earnings on Wednesday night. Now, we're recording this just before the Jackson Hole summit where Jay Powell will be speaking, but a lot of stuff going on in Fedland, specifically Trump asking one of the Fed governors to resign. We're seeing more pressure on the Federal Reserve. Any thoughts on what's happening with the Fed right now, Josh, and perhaps any predictions maybe on interest rates or what's going to happen in terms of the Fed governorship? What's going on here with the Fed?
On Wall Street, this is being characterized as Powell's last stand, meaning this is conceivably his last Jackson Hole address. If you believe the president's rhetoric on Twitter, this guy's out of here when his term ends in May, if not sooner. So this is really his chance, I think, to cement his legacy rhetorically at the podium. There's a lot of people who think he's going to use this as an opportunity to reassert the need for there to be an independent Fed and to do something that's somewhat politically charged. I actually am predicting I would go the other way. I think this is going to be more of like, I don't want to say victory lap, but like, I think he's going to signal that September we're getting a rate cut because the Fed has given it so long and has done what it had to do. The big debate in the Fed minutes that came out this week, some of the committee believe that the risk is to the upside, meaning higher inflation, stickier inflation. And then some believe the risk is actually to the downside because the labor market, by some metrics, is weakening. So there's not agreement in the committee. It's not like they all think one thing. And you had 2 dissenters on the Fed's last FOMC where they chose not to cut rates. You had 2 dissenters who thought they should have. So, and that's, it's not that rare, but it's rare enough that it's worth mentioning.
Yeah.
So I think the Fed is not going to give I think Powell is not going to give a politically charged speech. I think he's going to give us a dovish hint. And then in September, he'll follow through with maybe 25 basis point rate cut. And I actually think he's aiming to cool down the temperature, not, stick his chin up and say, come fuck with me.
Cool down the temperature politically.
Yeah.
I mean, that is what is interesting. Is I agree. I think he does not want to get involved in a political spat. By the way, Scott takes the other side of this. He thinks, he says Powell's not going to cut rates because he wants to sort of give the finger. My view, this guy
Scott
doesn't
could be
have
right.
an ego like that.
Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think so.
But what you're saying is he does want to turn down the temperature politically because it has become politicized.
The more independently he tries to act as Fed chair, the more he's endangering.
He doesn't have a choice.
But the more he's endangering the independence of the Fed. This is not the first president in history to have an opinion on where interest rates should be. This is not the first president in history to try to intimidate the chairman of the Federal Reserve into acting on the administration's best interest. It's just not. He has a style all his own. It's the first president to do this on Twitter.
Important detail.
No, I get it. But I don't think that Powell thinks what's in the best interest of the institution is to give the middle finger to Donald Trump.
Agreed.
And I also don't think a rate cut would be so crazy. Rates are too tight for a 1 to 2% GDP growth environment. If you're basing your opinion on whether or not rates should be cut on the stock market, then you don't even understand how the Fed works. The Fed is not supposed to be paying attention to the stock market as its own variable. It's employment versus costs. I don't think we're in an inflationary emergency, and I think rates are too high given economic growth. The labor market is not as strong as it was last year, and they did a rate cut last year. So I don't think it's that hard for Powell to get to the place where he says, all right, here's your fucking 25 basis points. Enough already. And that's what I think. Well, that's my prediction. I don't know anything more than anyone else. That's what I think.
I like that prediction. Okay. Josh Brown is the co-founder and CEO of Ritholtz Wealth Management, a New York City-based investment advisory firm managing $6.5 billion in assets for individuals, corporate retirement plans, and foundations. He also is a podcaster. You should check out his podcast, The Compound and Friends. Am I missing anything, Josh?
No, it's enough. It's enough already with me. It's enough.
Okay. We really appreciate you standing in for Scott this week.
It's a pretty momentous week. I mean, I think all signs point to what we've been waiting a very, very long time for, which is who's going to succeed Bob Iger. And again, we thought we all knew that a few years ago with Bob Chapek, but that obviously didn't last very long. And so I think everyone sort of believes this time Bob really means that he actually is leaving. And so, all eyes are on this succession story.
Does that explain what happened with the share price? I mean, the stock's down 7% after a pretty great earnings call. I mean, overall, it's pretty good. What explains the movement in the stock right now?
I think the fear on earnings is that the March quarter, their fiscal Q2, because Disney's a fiscal September company. And so their fiscal Q2 is not great. There's a number of headwinds. The theme park attendance looks like it's going to be flat to down. They're signaling weakness in international travel to the U.S. And they're really putting the majority of the earnings growth they're expecting this year on the back half of the fiscal year. And I think, the minute you say to investors, the current outlook is not so good, but we'll pick it up or it'll improve later, that is generally a good signal to I'm scared they're going to miss numbers, right? Yep. And then add on to it, Ed, the other piece of this is not just is Bob Iger leaving, but again, according to press reports, and this is unverified at the moment that we're recording, but the story goes is that Iger's also going to leave before his December 31st contract year end. So just imagine you're an investor, you're hearing earnings are very back half weighted, and Bob's leaving sooner than you expected. right? Like, and theme parks, which is the number one reason people own Disney. Like, sure, ESPN and Disney Plus, but if you look at like what people get excited about to own Disney now, given the size of the business, it's really about its theme park and cruises. So their experiences segment, as Disney calls it, that business facing sort of, headwinds from an attendance standpoint spooks people. And look, it may get better. But, attendance grew 1% this quarter, but they were comping against hurricanes. So organically, it was flat to down. Sounds like it's going to be flat to down in the U.S. in fiscal March Q2. And then the question is, can they actually accelerate that in the back half of the fiscal year? And I think you're seeing from investors today, they are nervous.
Yes. When we just look at the succession plan here, who's in the running? Who might it be next?
I mean, look, we've gone out in our top 20 predictions for the year and said it would be Josh D'Amaro, who is currently the head of the theme parks. I think, go back to what I just said a minute ago, the reason investors own this stock, like I can't say this enough times, they own it for theme parks. So to choose someone who is not the theme park person, I think at this point would be strange. Dana Walden is a great executive. She's had an incredible career. She came from Fox. When Disney bought Fox, she came over. She has an incredible resume in terms of what she's been able to achieve creating content over her career. But again, if you think about what Disney is all about, it's not really about television, which is Dana's forte, and it's really not about the TV business at all. Again, it's really, I really think about Disney as really two things right now. It's the creative engine on the film side that is driving theme parks and consumer products, Disney Plus. But it really, comes down to so much of this is the high profile movie content and the theme parks. And I think that's just not her focus. And so I'd be surprised if Disney went in that direction. I mean, look, Ed, there is always a wild card that either it's a dual CEO and or that it is somebody from the outside. But again, every single data point seems to point towards it being Josh. And then I think the really big question for your viewers and listeners is this an indication of Disney pivoting? Like, will there be a strategic pivot? Are they just keeping all of the assets they have today? Again, Josh comes from the theme park segment. He's not a TV guy. He's not an ESPN sports guy. Do they reconfigure the company? And our bet is that he's going to lead investors to believe that structural change, meaning separating the companies the way a Warner Brothers has been, is in process of separating, selling a piece to Netflix and spinning off their linear TV assets. That's obviously what Comcast just did with Versant. We think there's a lot of logic to Disney simplifying its corporate structure over the course of the next couple of years. It wasn't going to happen under Bob Iger. It could certainly happen in 27 under Josh.
And would that corporate restructuring involve moving the theme parks and experiences business to its own unit? Is that going to be sort of the Versant for Disney?
No, I think you would keep theme parks and studio and Disney Plus all in one unit. So you'd have the production of movie content, the production of TV content, the distribution on, Disney Plus. You would have, the Hulu business, but then you would take ESPN and ABC and all of those TV stations and ship it off into a separate entity. And so theme park, studio, and streaming all stay in one unit. And essentially what you would call, Ed, linear TV, which I know when we're talking about, a show that streams online, seems a little bit outdated at this point in time. You would take the very profitable. Remember, these are huge profit engines for Disney. I mean, I don't want to make light of the fact that ESPN and ABC are incredibly profitable businesses, but they're just not growth businesses in the way that the other assets are. And so I think you would capitalize them differently. Maybe they would look for their own M&A over the next few years. I mean, we continue to believe that Disney, if you got rid of TV and got rid of sports, could you lean into video gaming, interactive entertainment? Think about the Epic Games where they already have a joint venture with, or think about Roblox. Like, if you think about what your, viewers and listeners and what their kids are doing, it looks very different than watching linear TV in 2026. And so I think there's a lot of rationale for why a new Disney CEO would really rethink what the business should look like for the next decade.
100%. One that we haven't gotten your views on, it's been a while since we had you on the program, is the situation between Warner Brothers and Netflix.
I
And
haven't heard about that.
Paramount.
What's going on there?
Just can we get your updated perspective? I know that you're going down to DC for the hearing. What are your views on the Warner Brothers situation and how this is all going to shake out?
I mean, look, Netflix is currently the winning bidder, been selected by Warner Brothers. Paramount doesn't like it. Paramount is trying to run a hostile proxy battle to try to win over Warner Brothers shareholders. I think the challenge right now is, the approach that Paramount is taking is essentially, hey, we don't need to raise our bid anymore. We will just wait this out. We think we're going to get meaningful regulatory approval, and we think that will push Warner Brothers shareholders to pressure management to take and reconsider our bid. I think that's unlikely. I mean, just given where the Netflix bid is at $27.75 in cash, the stub, which is going to be spun off, probably has more value than what Paramount has talked about publicly. And so I think for shareholders, unless Paramount is willing to meaningfully raise its bid, it's in a tough spot. And I'll be honest, Ed, leverage, looking at the media business, especially a lot of TV assets, legacy media, linear TV, being levered, when you need to go through a dramatic investment cycle, like if you look at Paramount, I was out at UFC 2 weeks ago out in Vegas, like they need to go through, they just spent $1 billion on UFC. Those are the types of big, bold investments Paramount should be making. Like they're trying to change how you think about Paramount Plus. They want your viewers to have a reason to keep coming back to Paramount Plus. Great. But to make those types of investments, not having leverage or having low leverage is a real asset. And so levering up to 7 times or maybe more to buy WBD sounds a little crazy from our standpoint. And I actually wonder if we're past the point where if I'm really looking at this, like unless Larry Ellison's willing to put up a lot more cash of his own, but levering this company 7 times, at closing before you get all the synergies, levering it that high feels to me a bit dangerous. And I think if I were sitting there, if I was David Ellison, 42, 43 years old, having, 20, 30 years, 40 years in front of me, I think I would look at this and say, I can invest and build for the future. I don't need to over lever this to buy Warner Brothers. And so I actually think there's a scenario where they probably won't just walk away, Ed. Like, I think they really don't want to walk away, but they probably should. And it'll be interesting tomorrow. There is certainly a view in DC that, oh my God, Netflix and Warner Brothers is too big and scary. But, on the flip side, like look at YouTube, right? Like the elephant in the room, as you know, and we've talked about on your show, YouTube is the monster, and it's the number one reason or the number one use of anything watched on the TV is YouTube. Like that's hard to fathom. And so the reality that Netflix buying Warner Brothers or Netflix buying HBO, it is effectively, it's like a 1-point increase to Netflix's market share on the TV. YouTube is still larger. I mean, YouTube's larger than Disney. If you take Disney Plus, ABC, ESPN, Hulu, ESPN Plus, YouTube is still meaningfully larger. And so, like, this idea that, like, Netflix can't buy HBO, I understand where it comes from, but I think it is not a well-educated view on what the actual competitive landscape and what your viewers are actually doing when they get home from work, the competitive choices of where they spend their time. I think if you really look at it honestly, there is tremendous competition, and there really shouldn't be a reason why that transaction is blocked.
100%. We'll be watching that throughout the day. A lot more we could discuss, and I'd love to do it another
amounts of CapEx being spent on AI. And if you pull that leg of the stool away, there's no way we would have had a 30% recovery off the Liberation Day lows in April. No chance. Yeah. Not a chance. If you don't have that leg of the stool, there aren't 2 other legs. And that's what the market is very precariously balancing itself upon.
Well, I think that really sums it up. And I think that is
very
possibly
good at this.
what I think that is probably what is most concerning is it does emphasize the extent to which the entire market is dependent and reliant upon this AI story. And so Yeah, an MIT report comes out and suddenly people get very nervous. I mean, by the way, I'm almost shocked by the lack of conviction that investors seem to have. The fact that this report comes out and then they say, "Oh, no, our thesis is wrong." That to me is a little bit crazy.
Well, in fairness, we're talking about a 2% move, but the Nasdaq has like tripled
Yes,
in recent years. It's not.
they haven't reversed their opinions, but there has certainly been a vibe shift in AI in the last 2 or 3 days.
I agree.
We're seeing it in the markets. We're also seeing it online, chatter, people saying, "Oh, is the AI story, is it not going to happen?"
The Sam Altman thing is notable, but I think people don't understand what he's saying. He's not saying there's a bubble in AI. He's saying there's a bubble in other people investing in things that might compete with him.
Yes.
He's still going to raise money in the private market at a $500 billion market cap. You know he is. He'll break every record on the books for a privately held company that only 2 years ago was like a not-for-profit. He's going to raise money at a $500 billion valuation. So what he's basically saying is he sees a lot of other people funding things that could represent a challenge to ChatGPT and other products at OpenAI, and they're destined to fail. And that's that. Read between the lines. That what he's basically saying is we own this, and all these other valuations people are paying for other startups are going to look foolish.
Right.
He's not going to say it the way I'm saying it, but that's what he means.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely right. But just going back to what you say there about the reliance, the dependence in the markets on AI, just some data here. So the top 10 stocks in the S&P right now account for 40% of the entire market cap of the S&P, 25% of the entire earnings of the S&P. NVIDIA alone makes up 8% of the S&P. It's the largest single stock concentration in over 40 years. We've seen this just unbelievable CapEx spending, leading AI companies spending a 10x increase in CapEx in the past 3 years. This is basically the AI market. This is the entire stock market. This is all that anyone cares about. As a money manager yourself, I mean, how are you supposed to kind of defend against that? You can't just get off of the AI train. There's clearly a bunch of AI hype that's happening, and that's sort of what Sam Altman is alluding to a little bit. But how are you supposed to sort of protect yourself and keep those two things in your head at the same time? One, yeah, of course we got to invest in AI. AI is the next thing. Two, at the same time, what does it mean that this MIT report is shaking investors' confidence, at least a little bit?
I think Palantir is a really powerful example of the case that we make with our clients. And just to back up, we're not bears on AI, and we've been invested in this theme the entire way up. Obviously, these are some of the biggest stocks in the world. I've been bullish and talking about NVIDIA, long NVIDIA personally, for 11 years now. So I don't want to give people the impression that I'm like predicting a crash, but we're very sober when we talk to clients about the possibility that there could be a hiccup along the way or something worse. And, we preach diversification, which seems really quaint right now, but like fanny packs, it will come back into style eventually. It always does. It could be many, many years between now and when that happens. We're managing $6.5 billion for over 4,000 families. And people have a lot of money at risk in the stock market with good reason. People are going to have very long lifespans and they need to earn above inflation returns. And our job is to help people, get from A to Z, and Z could be a long way off. So we have to take risk. We have no choice. But we want to take intelligent risks. I was talking to a client yesterday, extraordinarily wealthy person, very successful, way more successful than I am. But one of the things that we're talking about, he's saying, look, I understand, diversify, et cetera, but it seems like none of these other stocks matter anymore. And he had a really good point. I remember a time where Target would report earnings, the markets would almost shut down because everybody would want to hear what the CEO had to say about the outlook and the consumer. But no one even notices anymore. There were times where McDonald's and Home Depot and these were bellwether, what is the state of the consumer? Let's tune in and listen. these earnings reports in the last week, they come and go because they're not the thing that's driving earnings. When you talk about the size of the hyperscalers in the S&P 500, like what percent they make up, proportionally, the earnings growth is even bigger. The earnings growth is coming from a very select group of stocks. They happen to be so gigantic that it's meaningful for the overall index. And then you start talking about like, oh, Freeport-McMoRan is a bellwether for copper demand, and nobody gives a shit. I don't even think its market cap is 20 billion. So like, it almost doesn't matter. The amount that Nvidia's market cap moves in a day is larger than 400 companies in the S&P 500. So when people say like, oh, the try to connect the dots, the stock market, the economy, from my perspective, they've never been further apart. So I don't think the Main Street economy is bad. I just don't think it looks anything like what the S&P has done over the last couple of years, and that people struggle with that disconnect. So our message, to get to the answer to your question in a very roundabout way, but our message, Ed, is the market that we're in right now is not the market that we're always going to be in. This year, the factor with the most import to returns is momentum. Fine, we all understand that, but that's not every year. Some years it's dividend yield. Some years it's balance sheet quality. Some years it's competitive moat. Some years it's value. Some years it's a size factor, and small cap does better than large cap. It's been a minute, but it happens. The purpose of maintaining diversification is you always have to say you're sorry, but you also never have to say you're sorry. You are not going to be able to race Nvidia and Broadcom with a portfolio year after year and not eventually pay the penalty. So I mentioned Palantir. This company put up one of the most insanely good earnings reports I have ever seen. I'm doing this 28 years. Insane on every metric. The rate at which they're adding corporate customers, the rate at which they're adding government contracts, the growth of cash flow, the growth of profit, the growth of profit margin. You look at this report, and then the CEO comes on the call, and he's like, fuck you to the haters. Literally, that's what he did. The stock has now erased the entirety of its post-earnings pop. It had this massive move where like...
down like 10%,
Yeah.
right? Something crazy.
So like every growth manager who owned stocks and didn't own Palantir basically had to buy it that day or get fired, right? And then like within a week, that entire post-earnings pop disappears. What is the message? The message is, yeah, we already know how good AI is. We already get it. We already know how good Palantir is. That's why it's a $400 billion market cap on revenue of $4 billion. We get it. Everybody gets it. There's no one left to figure it out. So that's really what we're trying to get across to clients. It's not saying we're bearish on AI. It's just like, dude, how much more do you think could possibly be in the tank, given that everyone agrees?
Yeah. But I think some people would say that sounds like a little bit like a bubble.
It is a bubble, but it could be, but it could be 1997. It doesn't have to be March of 2000 yet. Of course, it's a bubble. There's a CapEx bubble every generation. It's not that rare. It's not that unique. We had them in the 50s. We had them in the 60s, in the 70s. But it always happens. It's happening again. No big deal. It's not a signal to sell everything and hide. Not every CapEx bubble has to result in a generational crash. You could just have a bear market follow this. And what if it starts 3 years from now? Think of all the money that you are missing out on making, worrying about it's a bubble, it's not a bubble.
The answer remaining that the diversification is key, I assume, is basically where you ultimately land. But again, it's an interesting thing because a lot of people, as you say these days, are saying, well, diversification's for losers. You might as well be in the S&P 10.
I have some clients where if I listen to them, their portfolio would be like 30% Nvidia, 30% Palantir.
They'd be crushing it.
And by the way, they would have won big. The problem is, what does that look when this ends? What does that look like? And I want to say one thing about the bubble idea, and then we can move on. The 2000 bubble burst. It's really important. I was talking to a venture capitalist who is about my age. We both had roughly the same experience when we started in the 90s. There was about I don't know, let's call it 450 billion in market cap in the stocks that we tend to identify with the 2000 bubble. Like, it was not large at all. 450 billion in market cap. The combined profits of all of those companies was like 15 billion. It was tiny, like literally tiny. OpenAI is going to do like $15 billion in profit this year alone by itself. And when you look at the revenue of the companies involved today and the market cap and the amount of employees and the amount of customers, it's literally night and day. Back then, forget about price to earnings ratio. These were companies that were pre-revenue. No revenue, no business model. You can't say that today. These companies are among the most successful companies of all time on every metric. Tons of revenue, tons of earnings, tons of growth. So it's not a great analog. Back then, there were 200 million internet users. There are 7 billion internet users right now. It's a completely different world. So I don't love the comparison.